When my daughter's father-in-law was discharged from the hospital after a mild stroke, his own family suddenly became too busy to pick him up. I drove a long distance to bring him home because I believed he needed someone he could trust. But the moment he got into my car, he looked around carefully and whispered, "Don't take me home. Take me to the lawyer's office." I froze behind the wheel. I had no idea why he was avoiding his own family or what secret he was about to reveal. Thank you for being here. It means more than you know. Before this story unfolds, tell me in the comments, what country or city are you watching from today? Your answer always makes my day. Welcome to Dad Family Revenge, where every story carries something worth keeping. Note, certain details here are fictional, built for educational purposes. Coincidences to real people or places are unintentional. The message, however, is entirely intentional. The phone buzzed twice before I even looked at the screen. NYU Langone Hospital. My chest tightened the moment I read those 3 words. I set down my pen, pushed the contract aside, and answered before the second ring finished. Mr. Hayes. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, the kind of calm that hospitals train their staff to use when delivering news that is anything but. This is the patient services desk at NYU Langone. We have an Edward Collins here. He listed you as his emergency contact. I was already reaching for my jacket. My name is Richard Hayes. I am 60 years old. 32 years ago, I started Hayes Technologies in a rented office the size of a large closet in Brooklyn, with 2 folding chairs, 1 second-hand desk, and more debt than I care to remember. Today, that company occupies the 34th floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan. Private. No public offering, no outside investors, no board of directors I did not personally choose. Every dollar of it built by hand. But none of that mattered the moment I heard Edward's name connected to a hospital. I called Sophia first. My daughter. 32 years old, sharp as anyone I had ever hired, currently serving as chief financial officer of the company I built for her to one day lead. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Dad, I'm in the middle of the quarterly review. Can this wait until... Edward is in the hospital. NYU Langone. I'm going to pick him up when he's discharged. A pause, then, oh, is he okay? Mild stroke. He's stable. Okay. Her voice softened slightly, but not enough. Give him my love. I really can't step away right now. Ethan and I are presenting to the ops team in 20 minutes. I told her I understood. I did not tell her what I was actually feeling, which was a slow, spreading unease I could not yet name. I called Ethan next. My son-in-law. Edward's son. Chief Operating Officer of Hayes Technologies, a position I had given him 3 years ago because I trusted the Collins name the way I trusted my own. He answered immediately, which surprised me. Then he spoke, and the surprise faded. Richard. Yeah, I heard Sophia just texted me. Listen, I've got the ops presentation in a few minutes and then a call with the logistics partner in Chicago. It's going to be a full afternoon. He exhaled. Dad's tough. He'll be fine. Can you handle the pickup? Can you handle the pickup? Edward Collins had been Ethan's father for 35 years. He had coached Ethan's Little League team, driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to watch him graduate from business school, and stood beside him at the altar when Ethan married my daughter. And his son was asking me if I could handle the pickup. I gripped the phone tighter. My knuckles went white against the case. I'll take care of it, I said. I ended the call before I said something I could not take back. The drive to NYU Langone took 40 minutes in midday Manhattan traffic. I spent most of it replaying the 2 phone calls in my head, turning them over the way you turn a stone in your hand, looking for the angle that makes it make sense. I could not find one. Edward was sitting upright in the discharge area when I arrived, dressed in his own clothes, a paper bag of medications resting on his lap. He looked thin, thinner than the last time I had seen him, which had been 6 weeks ago over dinner in Westchester. But his eyes were sharp, alert, carrying something heavy behind them that had nothing to do with the stroke. He stood when he saw me, and I crossed the room and gripped his hand with both of mine. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said. "Don't be ridiculous." My throat felt tighter than I expected. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I look." He managed a thin smile, which isn't saying much. I picked up his bag. "Let's get you home." Edward did not move right away. He glanced toward the exit, then back at me. Something shifted in his expression, a decision being made behind those careful eyes. "Richard." His voice dropped low enough that the nurse at the nearby station could not have heard him. He placed one hand on my forearm, and the grip was firm, deliberate. "Don't let them know you're with me." His eyes held mine without wavering. Not yet. My heart knocked hard against my ribs. I studied his face, searching for confusion, for the disorientation that sometimes followed a stroke. There was none. What I found instead was clarity. A man who knew exactly what he was saying and had chosen every word with care. "All right," I said quietly. I put my phone on silent, and we walked out together into the July heat. The July heat hit us the moment we stepped through the hospital's sliding doors. Edward moved carefully down the front steps, one hand on the railing, the paper bag of medications tucked under his arm. I stayed close without hovering. He was a proud man, and the last thing he needed was to feel like an invalid on the sidewalk outside NYU Langone. I had pulled my car around to the pickup lane earlier. A dark blue Ford Explorer, nothing flashy. Edward lowered himself into the passenger seat with a slow exhale, the kind that carries more weight than just physical effort. I closed the door gently and walked around to the driver's side. We pulled into traffic heading north on First Avenue. The city moved around us the way it always does, cabs cutting lanes, a delivery truck double-parked outside a deli, pedestrians crossing against the light without a second thought. New York does not slow down for anyone. Edward stared straight ahead through the windshield. His jaw was set. His hands rested on his knees, perfectly still, too still, the way a man holds himself when he is working very hard to appear calm. I turned onto 72nd Street, heading toward the FDR. The assumption was Westchester. Home. Rest. That was what you did when someone left the hospital. We had been driving for perhaps 8 minutes when Edward reached into the breast pocket of his shirt and produced a small, folded piece of paper. He did not hand it to me right away. He held it between 2 fingers, looking at it for a moment, as though confirming one final time that this was the right decision. Then he placed it on my knee. I glanced down without taking my eyes fully off the road. A single line of handwriting. Neat, deliberate in capitals, the handwriting of an engineer who had spent 40 years putting precision into everything he touched. Merritt and Associates. 75 Fifth Avenue, 4th floor. I recognized the name immediately. Daniel Merritt, corporate attorney, one of the sharper legal minds in Midtown Manhattan. I had crossed paths with him twice over the years at industry events, a quiet man who listened more than he spoke, which in my experience meant he was someone worth listening to when he finally did. I looked at Edward. His eyes met mine for just a moment, a single nod, almost imperceptible. He was afraid of being overheard, not paranoid. Afraid. There is a difference, and I had known Edward Collins long enough to know which one this was. I changed lanes, checked my mirrors, and pointed the car toward 5th Avenue. My heart was beating harder than I wanted to admit. "You faxed him from the hospital," I said. It was not a question. Edward's mouth tightened at the corners, the closest thing to a smile he could manage right then. "The nurses thought I was sending discharge paperwork to my physician." "Smart. Necessary," he corrected quietly. Then after a moment his voice dropped even lower. "Richard." He did not look at me. "Don't take me home." A pause. "Take me to the lawyer's office." We drove without speaking for another few minutes, and I let the silence breathe, but only for a moment, because my mind was moving too fast to stay quiet. "Edward." I kept my voice level, the way you do when you are trying not to rattle someone who is already carrying too much. "How long have you been planning to go to Daniel Merritt?" He turned to look at the passing buildings on Madison Avenue, the storefronts, the awnings, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon life of a city that had no idea what was sitting in my passenger seat. "Since the second week of March," he said. My stomach dropped. March. 4 months ago. 4 months of carrying whatever this was alone in a hospital bed, through a stroke, through recovery, 4 months of knowing something and saying nothing. "Why didn't you call me?" The words came out rougher than I intended, and I felt my grip tighten on the wheel. My knuckles ached. "Edward, why didn't you pick up the phone?" He turned back to face forward. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, but underneath it I could hear something fraying at the edges. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment and found that rehearsal does not actually prepare you for the real thing. "Because what I found out," he said slowly, "involves your daughter." The FDR Drive opened up ahead of us, the East River flat and gray to our right. I kept my eyes on the road. I kept my hands on the wheel. I kept my breathing even, measured, deliberate. But my chest felt like something had reached inside it and closed a fist around everything in there. "Tell me," I said. Edward reached into the paper bag on his lap and produced a small USB drive, the kind you could buy at any pharmacy. He held it up briefly, then set it on the center console between us. "Not here," he said. "Not in the car." His voice dropped to just above a breath. "Richard, Ethan has been signing your name on documents you have never seen." The traffic light ahead turned red. I pressed the brake. The car stopped, and for the first time in 30 years of building something from nothing, I did not know what to say. Daniel Merritt's office did not look like a place where lives got rearranged. The fourth floor of 745 Fifth Avenue was quiet in the way that expensive places often are: thick, carpet-framed architectural prints on cream walls, a receptionist who smiled with the practiced warmth of someone paid to make difficult conversations feel manageable. She showed us in without asking our names. Daniel had told her to expect us. He was standing when we entered the conference room, 50 years old, maybe a few years past that, with the kind of lean, unhurried bearing that comes from spending 2 decades in rooms where panic is a liability. He shook Edward's hand, first carefully, then mine. "Richard," his voice was measured, "I'm glad Edward reached you." "So am I," I said, though I was not entirely sure glad was the right word for what I was feeling. We sat. The conference table was long enough for 8 people, but there were only 3 of us, which made the room feel both too large and too small at the same time. Daniel had a legal pad in front of him, already filled with notes. He had been preparing since Edward's fax arrived that morning. Edward placed the USB drive on the table between us. Daniel plugged it into his laptop without ceremony. "I'm going to walk you through what we have," Daniel said, turning the screen so all 3 of us could see it. "Edward sent me preliminary documentation 2 weeks ago. What's on this drive is the rest." The first document was a corporate filing. Meridian Consulting LLC incorporated in Delaware 14 months ago. Delaware is a common state for incorporation because its business laws are flexible and its disclosure requirements are minimal. A company can exist on paper in Delaware with nothing more than a registered agent and a filing fee. No employees required. No physical office required. No evidence of actual work required. Meridian Consulting had none of those things. What it did have was a bank account that had received wire transfers totaling just over $1.4 million from Hayes Technologies and Collins Software. Over the past 14 months, payments logged as consulting fees for services that, when Daniel's forensic accountant reviewed the records, had produced no deliverables, no reports, no meetings, and no correspondence beyond the invoices themselves. The money went in. The money went somewhere else. And the paper trail had been constructed carefully enough that a routine audit would likely have missed it entirely. My throat felt like I had swallowed concrete. "Who controls Meridian?" I asked. Daniel turned to the next document. A beneficial ownership filing, the kind of record that identifies who actually profits from a company, regardless of whose name appears on the incorporation papers. He tapped the screen with one finger. I leaned forward, read the name, read it again. Ethan Collins, my son-in-law, the man I had brought into my company, given a title, given access, given trust I had spent 30 years deciding who deserved. My jaw tightened so hard, I felt it in my back teeth. "There's more," Daniel said quietly. He moved to the next file. 3 contracts, internal agreements between Hayes Technologies and 2 vendor companies. Standard-looking documents, the kind that crossed executive desks a dozen times a month. Scope of work, payment terms, authorized signatures. My signature on all 3. I pulled the laptop closer, studied each one. The signature looked right, the slight leftward lean, the way the H connected to the A, the small loop at the end of the S. It looked right because whoever had produced it had been careful, had studied the original, had practiced. "I have never seen these contracts," I said. My voice came out flat, controlled. But my hands, I pressed them flat against the table because they had begun to shake in a way I did not want either man to see. I know," Daniel said. "A forensic document examiner reviewed them yesterday. The signatures are forgeries. Under New York penal law specifically, Section 170.10, forgery of a business instrument, is a Class D felony. We are talking about a crime that carries up to 7 years in prison per count." He paused, letting that land. "There are 3 counts here." Edward made a sound from across the table, not quite a word, something lower than that. I looked at him. His eyes were red at the edges, and he was pressing 2 fingers against his mouth, the way a person does when they are trying to hold something in that wants very badly to come out. "Edward." My voice cracked on his name before I could stop it. "Did you know about the forgeries when you were in the hospital?" He nodded. One slow, painful movement. "Is that why you had the stroke?" He lowered his hand from his mouth. "The doctors say stress was a contributing factor." A pause. "I had been carrying this for a while, Richard." Something broke open in my chest right then, not anger, not yet. Something older and worse than anger. The feeling of standing in a place you thought you knew and realizing the floor beneath you is not what you believed it to be. Daniel cleared his throat gently. "There is one more thing you need to see." He opened the final document on the screen. A cap table, a record of who owns what percentage of Hayes Technologies. 4 names I did not recognize. 4 separate brokerage accounts. 4 different addresses across 3 states. and a combined total highlighted in red at the bottom of the page that made my vision go sharp at the edges. 18.3%. These accounts, Daniel said, all trace back to the same beneficial owner. He looked at me steadily. The same name as Meridian Consulting. I sat back in my chair. The room felt different than it had 60 seconds ago. Smaller, the cream walls closer together. How much more does he need? I asked. 6.7%, Daniel said. At the current acquisition rate, approximately 30 days. I looked at the number on the screen for a long moment. Then I looked at Edward, who was looking at his hands. His shoulders curved inward, like a man trying to make himself smaller than his grief. 30 days. Nobody moved for a long moment after Daniel said those two words. 30 days. Daniel closed the laptop. The screen going dark felt like a door shutting on something I could not unshut. He set his pen down on the legal pad and leaned back in his chair, giving us room to breathe or to try to. Edward was the one who finally spoke. "I owe you an explanation," he said. He was looking at the table, not at me, and his voice carried the particular weight of a man who had rehearsed this conversation many times and still found it harder than he expected. 8 months ago, I noticed the numbers. I waited. My hands were still pressed flat against the table. The quarterly reconciliation between our two companies, Edward continued. The figures coming out of Meridian did not match the project hours. I ran it 3 times because I thought I had made an error. He exhaled slowly. I had not made an error. You confronted Ethan, I said. Edward nodded. I called him into my office, alone, showed him what I had found. A pause that lasted long enough to hurt. He had an answer for everything, Richard. Tax optimization. Liability shielding. He used language I recognized as the kind of language that sounds exactly right when someone wants you to stop asking questions. My jaw tightened. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. Edward finally looked up at me, and what I saw in his face made my chest ache. Not anger, not accusation, just the raw and honest grief of a father who had looked at his son and chosen hope over evidence. There is a difference. I know that now. Daniel leaned forward. What changed? 3 weeks before my stroke, Edward said I found a second set of records, buried inside a vendor contract renewal, the kind of document that gets routed through without much scrutiny. His hands tightened on the edge of the table. It was a term sheet, a preliminary agreement between Ethan and a private equity fund called Northbridge Capital, based in Greenwich, Connecticut. I did not recognize the name. What does Northbridge do? They identify undervalued private companies, Daniel said, picking up the thread smoothly. They acquire controlling interest, restructure aggressively, then either sell or take the company public at a significantly higher valuation. It is a legal strategy when the shares are acquired legitimately. His eyes met mine. The term sheet Edward found was contingent on one condition. I already knew what he was going to say. I felt it coming the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. That I'm no longer running Hayes Technologies, I said. Daniel nodded. Northbridge has placed $40 million in escrow. The funds release upon confirmation that current founding leadership has been replaced. $40 million. Sitting in an account somewhere in Connecticut waiting for me to disappear. Edward's voice dropped lower. I tried to get more documentation before I came to you. I did not want to bring you half a story. His fingers pressed hard against the table edge, the knuckles going pale. And then my body made the decision for me. The stroke. The hospital. The fax sent from a discharge room while a nurse thought he was contacting his physician. I pushed back from the table and stood. My legs felt steadier than I expected, which surprised me. I walked to the window and looked out at Fifth Avenue. The yellow cabs, the lunch crowds thinning as the afternoon stretched on the city, moving with complete indifference to the fact that everything I had spent 30 years building was 6.7% away from being taken from me. He used my name, I said. Not a question, not an accusation, just a fact I was making myself say out loud so it would become real. My own son-in-law forged my signature and used my name. Edward's chair scraped back. He crossed to the window and stood beside me, not speaking, just present the way he had been present at every hard moment in the past 4 decades. The way good friends are. "What do we do?" he asked quietly. I turned away from the window. Daniel was watching me from the table, pen in hand, legal pad ready. "We start tonight," I said. I did not sleep that night. By 2 in the morning, I was still at the kitchen table going through photographs I had taken of Daniel's documents on my phone, the Meridian filings, the forged contracts, the cap table with its highlighted number. At some point, I made coffee. At some point, I stopped drinking it. By the time the sky began to lighten, I had read everything 3 times and understood it in a way that no amount of rereading was going to change. I was at the office by 7:15. Hayes Technologies occupied the entire 34th floor of its building on 6th Avenue. This morning it smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner and the particular tension of a day that had not yet decided what it was going to be. Helen Carter was waiting in the hallway outside my door. She had served as Chief Financial Officer of Hayes Technologies for 15 years before Sophia joined the company 3 years ago and stepped into that role. Helen had moved into a senior financial oversight position since then, a title that undersold what she actually did, which was know where every dollar in this company had ever gone. 52 years old, trim and precise reading glasses pushed up on her head and a leather portfolio under one arm. In all the years I had known her, I had never once seen her wait in a hallway. "Hi, Helen." I unlocked my door. "Come in." She sat across from me at the small round table by the window and placed an external hard drive between us. Her hands were trembling not from weakness, but from the effort of holding something back for a very long time. "I have been keeping this for 14 months, she said. "I tried to reach you 3 times. October, February, April. I don't remember those requests." "You wouldn't." Her jaw tightened. "The first time your assistant said you were in back-to-back investor calls. The second time I received an email from the COO's office, it said you had asked all financial matters routed through Ethan's team temporarily." She looked at me directly. "You never sent that instruction." It was not a question. "No," I said. "I never sent that." Something crossed her face, relief and anger arriving at once. Her eyes went bright at the corners. "The third time I walked down the hall myself. Your assistant said you were working remotely. I checked the parking garage." She pressed her lips together. "Your car was there." She opened the portfolio and slid a printed spreadsheet across the table. 14 months of transactions, color-coded yellow for irregular timing, orange for budget mismatches, red for payments with no corresponding deliverables. There was a great deal of red. "Why are you bringing this to me now?" I asked. She looked at me before answering, and what I saw was not calculation. It was shame. "Because I told myself for 14 months it was not my place." Her voice cracked. "But this is my company too. I helped build it." She pressed one hand briefly over her mouth. "I should have said something a year ago." I reached across and placed my hand over hers. Her fingers were still trembling. "You're saying something now," I said. She nodded. Then she slid one more document across a printed email. Subject line: Post-Transition Valuation Summary. Sender: Ethan's personal address. Recipient: a domain I recognized immediately. Northbridge Capital. The final line highlighted in yellow: current founding leadership, not expected to remain post-acquisition. Valuation adjusted accordingly. My hand tightened over Helen's without meaning to. She did not pull away. Most of the floor had emptied out by 6:30. The cleaning crew came through at 7, working quietly with their carts and vacuums, paying no attention to the man sitting alone at the round table by the window with a cold cup of coffee and a hard drive that had just redrawn the map of everything he thought he understood. I heard the elevator open at 7:12. Sophia appeared in the doorway of my office carrying 2 cups from the coffee place on 53rd Street, the one we used to stop at together on Saturday mornings when she was in college. And I would let her sit in on weekend strategy sessions, just the two of us going through quarterly numbers like it was the most natural thing in the world. She had started doing that at 16. By 18, she understood margin structures better than some of my senior staff. I had been so proud of her. She set 1 cup in front of me and kept the other for herself, settling into the chair across the table with the particular ease of someone who had sat in that exact spot 100 times before. For just a moment, looking at her, the dark blazer, the reading glasses pushed up on her head exactly the way Helen wore hers, I felt something twist painfully behind my sternum. She looked so much like the person I had raised. "You look tired, Dad," she said. "Long day." I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "How was the ops presentation?" "Fine. Good, actually. Ethan handled most of it." She smiled, and the smile was warm, and that made it worse. "He's really good in those rooms." I said nothing. I watched her hands around her cup, steady, relaxed. She did not know what I knew. Or she did, and she was better at this than I had given her credit for. Then she reached into her bag and placed a document on the table. 12 pages. Crisp. Professionally formatted. The header read, "Temporary Transfer of Executive Authority, Hayes Technologies, Inc." My jaw tightened. "Before you read it," Sophia said quickly, leaning forward, "just hear me out. This is not what it looks like." "What does it look like?" I asked carefully. "It looks like we're trying to push you out." She shook her head, and something flickered behind her eyes: urgency, or something that wanted very much to look like urgency. "We're not. This is a temporary measure. 90 days. Just while the board evaluates the restructuring proposal. It protects you legally. Actually, it creates distance between you and any operational decisions made during the review period." I looked at the document without touching it. Under Delaware corporate law, a temporary transfer of executive authority, signed by a founding shareholder and witnessed by 2 board members, would carry immediate legal weight. It would not feel temporary. It would feel permanent the moment Ethan used it to call a shareholder meeting and vote through the restructuring proposal with the votes he had been quietly accumulating for 14 months. "Who drafted this?" I asked. Sophia hesitated. 1 heartbeat too long. "Our legal team," she said. "Ethan's legal team," I said. "Or yours?" Her chin lifted slightly. "We share legal counsel, Dad. We're married." "I know you are." I pushed the document back across the table toward her, gently. No anger in the gesture, just finality. "I'm not signing this, Sophia." Her breath caught. A flash of something crossed her face, and I watched it carefully, the way you watch weather moving across open water, trying to determine what kind of storm it is. She pressed her lips together, set her coffee cup down. Her hands, I noticed, were not quite as steady as they had been a minute ago. "Dad." Her voice dropped lower. "Please just trust us." "Us," I said quietly. That single word landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. She heard it. I watched her hear it, the way her shoulders drew in slightly, the way her eyes dropped to the table for just a fraction of a second before coming back up to meet mine. She stood, picked up her bag. The document she left on the table, whether by intention or oversight, I could not tell. At the door, she stopped with her hand on the frame. Her back was to me, and I could see the tension running through her shoulders, the rigid line of her spine, the way her fingers gripped the doorframe just a little too hard. "I'm trying to help you," she said. Her voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone working very hard not to let something spill over. "I know you believe that," I said. She left without another word. I listened to her heels on the floor until the elevator opened and closed. Then I looked at the document still sitting on my table, and I thought about the way her hands had trembled, not with deception, with fear. The question that kept me awake the rest of the night was not whether Sophia was lying to me. It was who she was afraid of and whether she even knew the answer herself. The meeting request arrived in my inbox at 7:45 Monday morning. Urgent shareholder review, Hayes Technologies strategic planning session. Convened by the Office of the Chief Operating Officer. Mandatory attendance requested for all equity stakeholders. Conference room, a 34th floor. 10 o'clock. I read it twice. Then I printed it, folded it once, and put it in my jacket pocket the way you pocket something you want to keep close. Ethan had made his move. By 9:55, conference room A was full. 12 people around the long table, 7 shareholders, 2 outside counsel, the company's comptroller, and 2 senior vice presidents who looked like they had not been told exactly what this meeting was about, but had sensed enough to dress carefully. Ethan stood at the head of the table near the presentation screen, relaxed in the particular way of someone who has rehearsed every word and every pause, and knows exactly how the next 90 minutes are supposed to go. I took a seat near the middle of the table. Not at the head, not at the far end. The middle where you can see everyone's face without turning your head. Ethan nodded at me when I sat down. Pleasant, professional, the nod of a man who believed he had already won. He opened with a slide that read, "Hayes Technologies building the next chapter." I want to start by saying something clearly. Ethan began, his voice carrying easily across the room. This company's foundation is extraordinary. 30 years of growth, of innovation, of Richard Hayes's vision made real. Nobody in this room disputes that. He paused, letting the acknowledgement settle, letting people nod. But extraordinary foundations require extraordinary next steps. And that is what we are here to discuss today. The slides moved smoothly. Revenue projections, market share analysis, competitor positioning. A section called Leadership Continuity that used phrases like agile decision-making and next-generation executive structure. Every word had been chosen to sound reasonable, to sound inevitable, to make what was coming feel like logic rather than what it actually was. The proposal appeared on slide 11. Founder and Chairman Emeritus Richard Hayes. Under Delaware corporate law and the shareholder agreement governing Hayes Technologies, a Chairman Emeritus position carried no voting rights, no operational authority, and no ability to block or approve major business decisions. It was a title, a nameplate, a framed photograph on a wall. Ethan described it as an honor. Around the table I watched faces. 2 shareholders were nodding along, both of them appointed to their positions within the past 20 months. 1 outside counsel was making notes. The comptroller was watching Ethan with the careful expression of someone who had learned to wait before deciding what to think. Ethan concluded his presentation and set his clicker down on the table with a small, satisfied click. "I'd like to open the floor," he said. "And Richard—" He looked at me with an expression that managed to be both respectful and dismissive at exactly the same time, which I had to admit required a certain skill. "I'd especially welcome your thoughts." I let a beat pass. Then another. I did not open a laptop. I did not look at notes. I stood up from my chair slowly, the way a man stands when he is not in a hurry, when he has nowhere more important to be, when he has already decided that the only thing that matters in this room is the next sentence out of his mouth. I looked at Ethan. He met my gaze without flinching, which told me he was either very confident or very committed to appearing that way. "I have one question," I said. My voice came out calm, steady. The voice of someone who had spent a week swallowing fire and had decided this was not the moment to let it show. "Just one before anyone votes on anything." Ethan spread his hands slightly. "Of course." I held his gaze across the length of the conference table. 12 people in the room, and I was looking at only one of them. "Meridian Consulting, LLC, I said. "Can you tell everyone in this room who the beneficial owner of that company is?" The temperature in the room changed. I felt it a collective shift, the way air moves when something invisible passes through it. 2 of the shareholders exchanged a glance. The comptroller's pen stopped moving. Ethan's jaw tightened. Just slightly, just enough. He did not answer immediately. 1 second passed, then 2, then 3, and in a room full of people trained to read hesitation. 3 seconds was a very long time. "That's—" he started. "Take your time," I said quietly. "We're all here." His eyes went flat and hard behind that practiced smile, and for the first time since I had walked into this room, I saw something underneath the confidence. Something that looked very much like the beginning of fear. I left the conference room without waiting for Ethan to recover his answer. There was nothing more to be said in that room, not by me, not that morning. I had planted the question where 12 people could hear it, and now it would do its own work. Questions have a way of staying alive inside a room long after the person who asked them has walked out. Daniel Merritt had texted me the previous evening. "One line, someone I want you to meet. Tuesday, 11 o'clock. Lexington and 51st. The place with the green awning." I found it without difficulty, a narrow coffee shop, wedged between a dry cleaner and a luggage store, the kind of place that had been there for 20 years without ever being discovered by anyone who wrote about coffee shops. 4 tables, a counter. A man already sitting at the back corner table when I arrived, facing the door, the way people do when they have spent a long time in jobs where sitting with your back to an entrance is not something you do. He stood when he saw me. Medium height, somewhere in his late 40s, wearing a gray sport coat over a plain white shirt. No tie. No badge, obviously. Nothing that announced what he was or had been. He extended his hand. "Marcus Webb," he said. "Daniel speaks highly of you." "Richard Hayes." I shook his hand and sat down across from him. "What did Daniel tell you? Should enough to cancel my other appointments this week?" He said it without drama, the way someone states a fact. "I spent 18 years in the FBI. White-collar crime division, the last 11 of those. Financial fraud, corporate espionage, insider trading. Since I left the bureau, I have done private investigative work for corporate clients." He picked up his coffee. "Daniel has sent me 2 cases in 4 years. Both times the situation was serious enough to warrant it. And this time, not this time," Marcus said, I've already been working for 6 days. He reached into the inside pocket of his sport coat and produced a slim folder. Not thick Marcus Webb, I would come to understand, was not a man who presented more than he needed to. He laid it open on the table between us. 4 names. 4 brokerage accounts at 4 different firms. 1 in Connecticut, 1 in New Jersey, 2 in New York. 4 sets of purchase records for Hayes Technologies shares going back 14 months. These accounts, Marcus said, tapping the first page, were opened within a 6-week window using different identification documents, different addresses, different contact information. He turned to the second page. But they all list the same beneficial owner in their internal compliance records, a detail that individual brokerages see but do not routinely cross-reference with each other. He looked at me. Unless someone goes looking. Ethan Collins, I said. Ethan Collins. Marcus turned to the third page, a running total. Shares acquired per month, cumulative percentage, projected date of reaching the 25% threshold under Hayes Technologies' shareholder agreement. As of last Friday, he controls 18.3%. At the current acquisition pace, he crosses 25% in approximately 26 days. 4 days shorter than Daniel's estimate from a week ago. He was accelerating. My coffee sat untouched in front of me. I had ordered it out of habit and forgotten it was there. There is a second piece, Marcus said. He produced a photograph. Printed on plain paper taken from a distance with a long lens, the kind of image that said the photographer had not wanted to be seen. 2 men standing outside a glass-fronted building in what I recognized as downtown Greenwich, Connecticut. One of them was Ethan. The other was a man I did not know, mid-50s, silver hair, the bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that moved large amounts of money. Graham Whitfield, Marcus said, managing partner of Northbridge Capital. He and Ethan have met 4 times in the past 3 months. Twice in Greenwich, once in Midtown, once at a private dining club on the Upper East Side. He tapped the photograph. I have records of all 4 meetings. I studied Ethan's face in the photograph. He was smiling, open, confident, leaning slightly forward the way people do when they want the other person to know they are engaged, that they are worth listening to. It was a version of my son-in-law I recognized from board presentations and client dinners. It was a version of him I had trusted. The $40 million in escrow, I said. Is it confirmed? Wired 3 weeks ago, Marcus said. I have the correspondent bank records through a contact at the receiving institution. The release condition is documented in the term sheet Edward found. He closed the folder. Richard, this is not an opportunistic scheme. This has been planned for at least 2 years, possibly longer. 2 years. Sophia and Ethan had been married for 3. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and held them there for a moment. My chest felt like something was slowly tightening around it, a pressure that had no single source and no obvious release. What do I need to do? I asked. Marcus picked up his coffee. First, you stop reacting and start building. Every piece of evidence we have needs to be documented, verified, and preserved in a form that will hold up in federal court. He looked at me steadily. And second, we need to move before he reaches 25%. Once he has that threshold, the legal landscape changes significantly in his favor. I looked at the photograph one more time. Ethan's smile, Graham Whitfield's silver hair, the glass building behind them catching the afternoon light. 26 days, I said. 26 days, Marcus confirmed. I left the Green Awning coffee shop 11 minutes later and walked north on Lexington Avenue into the midday heat, already reaching for my phone to call Daniel Merritt. Before I show you what Richard found that night, something that changed everything. Drop a 9 in the comments right now, so I know you are still here with me. Because what comes next is the one piece of evidence Ethan never thought anyone would find. Just a reminder, some details in this story are fictional, woven in for reflection and to carry a deeper message. If that is not something you wish to continue with, you are free to step away at any time, and I respect that completely. Frank Donahue called me at 11:17 that night. I was still at my desk. I had been at my desk since returning from Lexington Avenue, working through the documentation Marcus had provided and cross-referencing it with the files Helen had given me that morning. My jacket was on the back of the chair. My tie was on the desk. The city outside the window had shifted from its daytime roar to the particular nighttime register of Manhattan, lower, not quieter, the way a large engine sounds when it drops to a maintenance idle. I answered on the first ring. "It's Frank." His voice was careful, controlled in a way that told me the control was costing him something. "I need you to come down to the server room. Not tomorrow, now." Frank Donahue had been with Hayes Technologies for 16 years. He was 58 years old, built like someone who had spent his 20s doing physical work, before discovering that what he was actually good at was writing software architecture, the deep structural kind, the foundation-level code that determined how everything else in a system behaved. He wore flannel shirts regardless of the season and kept a photograph of his late wife on his desk, and had never in 16 years called me after 11 o'clock at night. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said. The server room occupied a climate-controlled space at the interior of the floor. No windows, steady cool air, the constant low hum of machines doing work that never stopped. Frank was sitting in front of a workstation. When I pushed open the heavy door, the blue-white glow of the monitor lighting his face from below. He did not turn around when I entered. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. He pointed at the screen. "Sit down and look at this." I pulled a chair beside him. On the monitor was an access log, a record automatically generated by Hayes Technologies' server system that documented every instance of someone logging into the protected repository where the company's most sensitive code was stored. Every entry showed a timestamp, a user account name, and a record of what files had been accessed or transferred. Frank scrolled to a specific date. 14 months ago. "This is the Project Keystone repository," he said. His voice had gone flat in the way voices go when emotion has been compressed into something very small and very hard. 6 years of work. The core architecture, the encryption layer, the client interface framework, the machine learning integration, all of it. Everything we built that makes this company's next product line possible. I looked at the log entry he was pointing to. User account E. Collins, COO access. Timestamp 11:41 p.m. Duration 11 minutes and 17 seconds. Action full repository export to external device. My stomach dropped so fast I felt it in my throat. "He copied everything," I said. "Every file." Frank's jaw was tight enough that I could see the muscle working in his cheek. The entire codebase, in 11 minutes and 17 seconds. He reached past me and opened a second window, an email recovery log from the IT system. 3 days later, our cybersecurity monitoring flagged an outbound encrypted email sent from a personal device on the company network. The recipient domain, he tapped the screen, belonged to a software company in Boston, a direct competitor. One that filed 3 patent applications in the following 8 months, covering technology that bears a significant structural resemblance to Project Keystone. I stared at the screen. My hands resting on my knees had curled into fists without my noticing. "Frank." I made myself unclench them. "Why didn't you report this when it happened?" He turned to look at me, then really look at me, and what I saw in his face was not evasion. It was the particular exhaustion of a man who had been carrying a weight he did not know how to put down. I brought it to the IT security lead the week after I found it, he said. He told me the COO had authorized the transfer for an external audit, that there was documentation on file. Frank's voice cracked slightly on the next sentence, and he pressed his fist briefly against his mouth before continuing. I asked to see the documentation. I was told it was above my clearance level. Above his clearance level. In a department he had helped build. The IT security lead, I said carefully. When was he hired? Frank looked at me. 20 months ago. 20 months ago. 2 months after Ethan had joined the company as COO. I stood up from the chair and walked to the far wall of the server room and stood there with my back to Frank for a moment, pressing one hand flat against the cool surface. The hum of the servers filled the space around me, steady, indifferent, the sound of systems functioning exactly as designed. The Defend Trade Secrets Act, I said, turning back around. Federal law. Passed in 2016. It protects proprietary software architecture as a trade secret, and the unauthorized transfer of that material to a competitor constitutes a federal crime. Criminal penalties, not just civil. I looked at Frank. Your access log is evidence. 14 months old and completely intact, which means nobody knew you still had it. Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. Nobody asked me to delete it. No, I said. They underestimated you. Something shifted in Frank's expression, then not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who had been made to feel small inside his own expertise and had just been reminded that the expertise was real. There is one more thing, he said. He reached over and pointed to a line in the access log I had not focused on the device identifier recorded automatically when the external drive was connected to the server. EC Personal Drive 02. He used his own drive, Frank said quietly. His personal device, registered to his name in our equipment inventory. I looked at those 5 characters EC, Ethan Collins, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Not anger anymore, something past anger. The particular stillness that comes when you have been looking for a way to be wrong about something and have finally run out of places to look. Send everything to Daniel Merritt tonight, I said. The log, the email recovery record, the device identifier. Everything. Frank nodded. His hands were already moving toward the keyboard. I brought coffee from the place on 57th Street, the one Edward had introduced me to sometime in the late 90s, back when we used to meet in Midtown, between appointments, and drink bad coffee out of paper cups, and talk about everything except what we were both actually worried about. He was sitting in the chair by the window when I arrived, dressed in his own clothes again. A cardigan over a collared shirt, looking out at the Hudson River with the particular stillness of a man who had been given a great deal of time to think and was not entirely sure he was grateful for it. The attending nurse, a young woman with a clipboard who introduced herself as Sandra, told me he had done well overnight. Blood pressure stable. No further episodes. She smiled the way medical professionals smile when they mean things could have been considerably worse, and left us alone. I set the coffee on the small table beside his chair and pulled the visitor's chair close. Edward looked at the cup. Then at me. Something moved through his expression, not quite a smile, not quite grief, something that occupied the narrow space between them. You remembered, he said. 2 sugars, no cream. I sat down. Some things don't change. He picked up the cup with both hands, the way a person holds something warm when they need the warmth more than the coffee. Outside the window, the Hudson moved south in the gray morning light, slow and wide and completely indifferent to the two old men sitting beside it. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Like a man who nearly died because he waited too long to do something he should have done 8 months ago." He said it simply. No self-pity in it, just the flat accounting of someone who had looked honestly at his own failures and decided the only useful thing left was to say them out loud. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and produced a small envelope. He held it for a moment before handing it to me. "See, Marcus got this to me through Daniel," he said. "3 days ago. I have been deciding whether to give it to you." I took the envelope. Inside was a USB drive smaller than the first one, the kind used for secure data transfer. "What's on it?" I asked. "A recording." Edward set his coffee down carefully. 6 weeks before my stroke, a former analyst at Northbridge Capital reached out to Daniel's office. She had left the fund voluntarily ethical concerns about a specific deal she had been asked to work on. He paused. "Under New York law, a recording is admissible in civil proceedings if at least one party to the conversation consents to being recorded. She recorded herself. That makes it legal." "What's on the recording?" Edward looked out at the river. "Ethan, on a call with Graham Whitfield, discussing the timeline." His voice dropped lower. "Richard, he uses your name. Not as a founder, not as a partner. He uses your name the way people use the name of an obstacle." My hand tightened around the USB drive. The plastic casing pressed into my palm. "There is something else I need to tell you," Edward said. I waited. His profile was sharp against the gray river light. The strong jaw, the deep-set eyes, the face of a man I had known for 40 years and thought I understood completely. "When I confronted Ethan 8 months ago," he said slowly, and he gave me his explanation. That the tax structure, the liability shielding all of it, I did not entirely believe him. He turned to look at me then, and what I saw in his eyes made my chest hurt, in a way that had nothing to do with anger. I chose to act as though I did, because believing him was easier than the alternative. The alternative being that your son had been deliberately dismantling 2 companies while their founders trusted him. "Yes." The word came out rough, scraped, like it had edges. "I am not asking you to forgive me for that, Richard. I am telling you because you deserve to know the complete truth, and I have kept enough things from you already." I looked down at the USB drive in my hand. Then I looked at my friend, this man who had stood beside me at my wife's funeral, who had called me at 2 in the morning when his own marriage ended, who had driven through a January ice storm to help me pitch the client that saved the company in its 3rd year. "Edward." My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Why didn't you just call me?" He exhaled slowly. "Because telling you meant watching your face when you understood what Sophia was involved in." His jaw worked for a moment. I could not decide which was worse, letting it continue or being the one to show it to you. The river moved outside the window. A tugboat pushed south against the current, slow and deliberate, making progress the hard way. "She's scared," I said. "I don't think she fully understands what she's in the middle of." Edward looked at me for a long moment. "She is her father's daughter," he said quietly. "That has always been true, even when she stopped acting like it." I closed my fingers around the USB drive and held it in my fist. "I need you to promise me something," Edward said. His hand moved across the armrest and found mine, the grip firm, deliberate, the grip of a man, making sure the words land where he intends them to. "Whatever happens next, this." He pressed my hand once. 40 years. Don't let them take this too. I looked at him, at the tiredness in his face and the steadiness underneath it, at the man who had made a mistake out of love and was sitting here in a hospital chair telling me the truth about it anyway. They can't take this, I said. I won't let them. Edward held my gaze for another moment. Then he picked up his coffee with his free hand and looked back out at the river. His shoulders dropped slightly, not in defeat, in something closer to relief. Outside, the tugboat disappeared around the bend in the river, still pushing south, still making progress the hard way. The doorbell rang at 8:47. I was in the kitchen of my apartment on the Upper West Side, standing at the counter with a glass of water I had poured 20 minutes ago and not touched, going over the day in my head, the way you go over a route you have driven 1,000 times, when something about it suddenly feels wrong. I was not expecting anyone. I set the glass down and walked to the door. Through the peephole I saw Sophia standing in the hallway. No briefcase, no portfolio, no document folder tucked under her arm. Just my daughter in a light jacket, her hair pulled back, her arms crossed over her chest, in the way she had stood since she was 12 years old, when something was bothering her, and she had not yet decided whether to say it. I opened the door. She looked at me for a moment without speaking, and I could see the effort it was taking her to hold her expression steady. Her eyes were dry but red at the outer corners, the particular redness that comes not from crying, but from hours of trying not to. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped back and opened the door wider. She walked past me into the apartment and stopped in the kitchen doorway, looking at the room the way people look at spaces they grew up in, searching for what has changed and finding mostly that nothing has. The same table, the same chairs. The coffee maker she had bought me 3 Christmases ago still sitting in the same corner. I pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. She sat down without being asked, which told me she had not come to negotiate. I sat across from her and waited. "Ethan knows you asked about Meridian in the shareholder meeting," she said. Her voice was careful, measured, the voice of someone who had rehearsed the first sentence and was less sure about everything that came after it. "He is not happy." "I imagine not," I said. "He thinks you are trying to undermine the restructuring." She pressed her palms flat on the table. Her fingers were trembling slightly, just enough that I could see it from where I was sitting. "He is talking about taking additional steps, legal ones." "What kind of legal steps?" Sophia's jaw tightened. "He mentioned filing a petition with the board to have your executive access suspended, pending a governance review." She looked at me directly for the first time since sitting down, and I saw something behind her eyes that had not been there 2 days ago in my office. A crack, small but real, running through the certainty she had been carrying. "Dad, if you would just sign the transfer document, this doesn't have to become a legal fight. You would still be chairman. You would still have Sophia." My voice came out gentle, not soft, gentle. "There is a difference. I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." She stopped, swallowed once. "When did Ethan first tell you about Meridian Consulting?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the sound of her breathing, of the refrigerator running in the corner of traffic 14 floors below, on the street. Her eyes dropped to the table. Her fingers pressed harder against the surface until the tips went white. "He explained it as a tax structure," she said quietly. "Last year." "Did he show you the incorporation documents?" A pause. "No." "Did he show you the bank records?" Another pause. Longer. "He said it was handled through the accounting team." I leaned forward slightly. "Sophia, did you sign any documents related to Meridian?" Her chin came up fast, a reflex, the kind of movement that comes before the mind has finished deciding what the body should do. Her eyes filled suddenly, not with tears exactly, but with the pressure of them, the way eyes look in the moment before the decision gets made. He told me they were routine vendor agreements, she said. Her voice had dropped to just above a whisper. He said the legal team had reviewed everything. He said, she stopped, pressed her lips together hard. Her shoulders were shaking now, a fine tremor running through them that she was working very hard to suppress. He had an answer for everything, Dad. Every time I asked a question, he had an answer that made me feel like I was the one who didn't understand. I felt something break open in my chest, not anger at her. Never anger at her. Something older and more painful than that. The specific ache of watching someone you love describe being slowly and carefully diminished by someone they trusted. Listen to me, I said. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. She flinched slightly, not away from me, just the flinch of someone who has been braced for a blow and received something else instead. I am not angry with you. I need you to understand that. Her throat moved. You should be. Maybe. I kept my hand over hers. But I'm not. I held her gaze. Sophia, I need you to ask Ethan one question. Just one. Ask him who else is involved in Meridian Consulting. Not the explanation, not the tax rationale. The names. Who else? She looked at me. Her eyes were bright and wet and frightened, and something else underneath all of that, something that looked, if I was reading it correctly, like the first cautious movement of a person beginning to suspect they already know the answer to the question they have been afraid to ask. And watch how long it takes him to answer, I said. She stood up from the table. Her chair scraped back. She crossed to the door and stopped with her hand on the frame. The same gesture she had made in my office 2 days ago, the same arrested quality to it, as though she were leaving against the better judgment of some part of herself. Dad. Her voice was barely above a breath. I know, I said. She left. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that, my hand still resting where hers had been, the warmth already fading from the wood. My phone buzzed on the counter behind me. I did not reach for it immediately. When I finally did, there was a message from Marcus Webb. Sophia left your building and went directly to a law office on 57th Street. Appointment was already scheduled, not Ethan's firm. I read it twice. Set the phone face down on the counter, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I allowed myself to feel something that was not dread. The article appeared on Monday morning. I found it the way I found most unwelcome things by accident before I had finished my first cup of coffee. A colleague forwarded it at 7:15 with a subject line that said only, "Thought you should see this." New York Business Journal, digital edition. The headline read, Hayes Technologies faces internal leadership questions amid calls for strategic transition. I read it standing at the kitchen counter in my apartment, still in the clothes I had slept in, which told you something about the quality of sleep I had been getting. The article quoted 3 anonymous sources described as people close to the company's board. It used phrases like founder resistance to necessary evolution and questions about current leadership's capacity for long-term vision and a company at a crossroads between its past and its future. There were no named sources. There were no specific accusations. Everything was framed as concern, genuine, collegial, reluctant concern from people who only wanted what was best for Hayes Technologies. I recognized every argument. I had heard them all in conference room A, delivered with slides and a clicker by a man in a well-fitted suit who had spent 4 years learning exactly which words would land in which rooms. I showered. I dressed. I was at the office by 8. Helen Carter was already at her desk when I arrived. She looked up when she heard me come in, and something in her expression shifted, relief maybe, or the particular steadiness that comes from seeing the person you have been worried about walk through the door looking like they intend to stay. "Have you seen it?" she asked. "Yes." I kept walking toward my office. "Come in." She followed me inside and closed the door. I did not sit behind my desk. I stood at the window and looked out at 6th Avenue at the morning crowds moving below at the city, doing what the city always did, regardless of what was happening 34 floors above it. The board members who were quoted, I said. "Can you identify them?" Helen set a folder on my desk. "I have 3 candidates based on the language used. All 3 were appointed in the last 22 months. She paused. "All 3 were recommended by Ethan." I turned from the window. "What about our existing clients? Anyone reaching out?" "2 calls this morning already." Her voice was controlled but tight. "One from the Harrington account. They want a reassurance call this week. One from Morrison Partners. They are, quote, reviewing their vendor relationships, unquote." She pressed her lips together. "There will be more." I nodded. "Schedule the Harrington call for Wednesday. Morrison Partners, I will handle that personally. Today, if possible." Helen looked at me carefully. "Should we issue a statement? Push back on the article publicly?" I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No. The best response to a story like that is the same response it has always been. I picked up the folder she had left on my desk. "Show up. Do the work. Let the work speak." She nodded once, sharp and decisive, and left. I spent the next 4 hours doing exactly that. I sat in on the product development review that had been scheduled for 2 weeks. I took the Morrison Partners call and spoke for 40 minutes about Hayes Technologies' pipeline, our delivery record, our team. I signed off on 3 contracts that had been waiting for my signature. I walked the floor twice, stopping at desks, asking questions, listening to answers. By 2 o'clock, the floor felt like itself again. By 4 o'clock, I was alone in my office, and the floor was quieter, and the afternoon light was doing what afternoon light does in July, going gold and long through the west-facing windows. And I stood at the glass and let myself feel for just a moment what I had been not feeling all day. My hands pressed against the cold glass. 30 years. Every client, every contract, every late night, every morning, I had walked through those doors and believed that what I was building was worth building. Every person on that floor who had given years of their working life to something. I had started with a folding chair and a second-hand desk and more debt than sense. My throat tightened. My eyes burned in a way I had not allowed them to burn in a long time. I pressed my forehead briefly against the glass, cold and solid and real, and took one long breath and then another. I was 60 years old. I had built this, and someone who had sat at my table, eaten at my house, called me by my first name for 4 years, was 26 days away from being able to walk into a shareholder meeting and vote me out of it. I let myself feel that. All of it. For exactly as long as it took to take 3 slow breaths against the cold glass. Then I straightened up, stepped back from the window, picked up my phone. It rang twice before Daniel answered. "Richard." His voice was careful in the way it got when he had news he was weighing. "Tell me," I said. A pause. Short but heavy. "Northbridge Capital filed this afternoon." His voice was steady and precise, the way it always was when the news was bad enough to require steadiness. "They have crossed 25%. Under the terms of the Hayes Technologies shareholder agreement, they have the right to demand a special meeting of shareholders." Another pause. We have 30 days before they can move to replace you. I looked out at the gold afternoon light on 6th Avenue. Then we have 30 days, I said. Richard. File the TRO tomorrow morning, Daniel. First thing. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which was exactly how I needed it to come out. And get Marcus on the phone tonight. It's time to move. Daniel Merritt's office at 7 in the morning looked different from how it looked in the afternoon. The light coming through the 5th Avenue windows was harder, more direct, the particular clarity of early summer sun that made everything look slightly more consequential than it might at other hours. Daniel was already at the conference table when I arrived. Jacket on legal pad, open 2 cups of coffee, waiting. He had been there before 6, I suspected. People like Daniel Merritt do not sleep well the night before they go to war. I sat down. He slid one of the cups toward me. "So you walk me through it one more time," I said. He nodded and turned the legal pad so I could see his notes. His handwriting was small and precise, the handwriting of a man who trusted accuracy more than emphasis. "We are filing 2 documents simultaneously at the Southern District of New York this morning," he said. "The first is the civil complaint, our primary action. 4 causes of action." He touched each item on the pad as he named it. Wire fraud under Title 18, United States Code Section 1343. That covers the Meridian transfers, every dollar moved through electronic means as part of a fraudulent scheme. Maximum 20 years per count, and we have multiple counts. I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Jacques Stukin. Second cause of action. Daniel continued. Trade secret misappropriation under the Defend Trade Secrets Act of 2016. Federal law. Project Keystone qualifies as a trade secret under the statutory definition. It is proprietary software architecture that derives commercial value from not being generally known, and Hayes Technologies took reasonable measures to protect it. The unauthorized transfer to a competitor is a textbook violation. He paused. Third breach of fiduciary duty. Ethan held the position of Chief Operating Officer. Under Delaware law, that position carries a duty of loyalty and a duty of care to the company and its shareholders. What he did is the clearest possible violation of both. And the fourth, common law fraud and civil conspiracy. Daniel looked at me steadily. The share purchases made through nominee accounts, false identities used to accumulate equity in a privately held company without disclosure to the other shareholders. Under New York common law, that is actionable fraud, and because Ethan did not act alone, he left the sentence open. Northbridge Capital, I said. Graham Whitfield and Northbridge Capital. Daniel confirmed. They knew the shares were being acquired through fraudulent means. Knowing participation in a fraud makes them co-conspirators. He turned to the second document on the table, thinner, more urgent looking. Somehow, though, paper has no urgency of its own. The second filing is an emergency application for a temporary restraining order under Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 65, he said. We are asking the court to immediately freeze all pending share transfers related to Northbridge Capital's position in Hayes Technologies and to prohibit any shareholder meeting from being convened until the underlying fraud claims are adjudicated. He met my eyes. A federal judge at SDNY can rule on a TRO application within 48 to 72 hours. If granted, it stops the clock on the 30-day window. I looked at the 2 documents side by side on the conference table. Everything we had spent 3 weeks assembling: Helen's hard drive, Frank's access logs, Marcus's photographs, Edward's recordings, Daniel's analysis compressed into paper and argument, and the particular language of federal civil litigation. There is no going back once we file, Daniel said. There hasn't been a way back for a long time, I said. File. He picked up his phone and called his paralegal. 3 words. Send them now. We sat for a moment after he put the phone down. The morning light shifted slightly through the Fifth Avenue windows. Somewhere below us, the city was doing what it always did, moving, pressing forward, indifferent to the question of who won and who lost in the rooms above its streets. There is one more thing, Daniel said. He reached into a separate folder and produced a sealed envelope. This goes to Sophia's attorney today, by messenger. I looked at the envelope. What is it? The documentation Marcus compiled regarding Ethan's post-acquisition plans for Sophia's equity position. Daniel set it on the table between us. She has retained independent counsel. Her attorney has a professional obligation to share material information with his client. He paused. She deserves to know the complete picture. I thought about Sophia's hands on the kitchen table 10 days ago. The fine tremor in her fingers. The way her chin had come up when I asked if she had signed documents she did not fully understand. Send it, I said. Daniel nodded and set the envelope aside for his messenger service. I left his office at 9:15 and walked south on Fifth Avenue in the August morning heat. My phone was in my pocket. I did not check it. I walked 3 blocks before I found a bench in a small plaza near 42nd Street and sat down for exactly 5 minutes, watching the people move past the tourists with their cameras, the office workers with their coffee, the city performing its daily indifference to the private emergencies happening inside it. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked back toward Midtown. That evening, just after 7, Marcus Webb sent me a text message. Sophia's attorney received the envelope at 2 this afternoon. She met with him for 90 minutes. She left the office and sat in her car in the parking garage for 40 minutes before driving away. I read the message twice, set the phone down on my kitchen counter. I tried to imagine what those 40 minutes in the parking garage had felt like, sitting alone in a car, underground, reading documents that told you the person you had built your life around had been planning to discard you before the ink on your marriage certificate was dry. My chest ached for her in a way that surprised me with its force. The phone buzzed again. Marcus. One more thing. The date on the post-acquisition restructuring document. The one that reduces Sophia's equity to below 5%. I picked the phone back up. It was drafted 14 months before your daughter's wedding. Marcus Webb chose the meeting place. A coffee shop on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, narrow, unremarkable, the kind of place that had been serving the same neighborhood for 15 years, without anyone outside that neighborhood ever thinking to write about it. Corner table, back wall. He was already there when Sophia arrived, which was how he preferred it. He liked to be the one who watched people walk through the door, not the one being watched. She came in at 11:10. She was wearing a gray coat, despite the August heat collar up, moving with the particular purposefulness of someone who had decided to do something difficult and was not going to give themselves time to reconsider. She spotted Marcus, immediately crossed to the table and sat down without extending her hand. He respected that. He slid the folder across the table before she could speak. "Your attorney has already seen the summary," he said. "This is the complete file." Sophia looked at the folder for a moment without opening it. Her jaw was set. Her hands were flat on the table on either side of it, as though she needed to anchor herself before she touched what was inside. Then she opened it. Marcus watched her read. He had done this long enough to know that you could learn more about a person in the minutes they spent reading difficult documents than in hours of conversation. Some people got angry quickly, a flush rising up the neck, a tightening around the eyes. Some people went very still. Some people started bargaining internally before they had finished the first page, already constructing the explanation that would make it not quite as bad as it looked. Sophia did none of those things. She read each page completely before turning to the next. Her breathing stayed even. Her face stayed controlled. But her hands told the truth. By the third page, her fingers had curled slowly inward until her knuckles were white against the table. By the fifth page, she was gripping the edge of the folder so hard that the cardboard bent slightly under her fingers. The final document was the post-acquisition restructuring plan, the one that reduced her equity to below 5%, the one dated 14 months before her wedding. She read it twice. Then she set it down on the table and pressed both palms flat again. She stared at the wall above Marcus's head for several seconds, and he could see something working in her throat, a swallow. Then another, the physical effort of keeping something contained that very badly wanted to come out. "He was planning this before he proposed to me," she said. Her voice was quiet and completely level in a way that took more control than shouting would have. Marcus said nothing. Sometimes the most useful thing you could do was not fill the space. "I signed documents," she said. "He would put them in front of me and explain them, and I would sign them because he always had an explanation. And I trusted—" She stopped, pressed her lips together until they went white. When she continued, her voice had dropped even lower. "I trusted him." She looked at Marcus directly. Then, the first time she had looked at him since sitting down. Her eyes were dry and very bright, and carrying the particular expression of someone who has just understood something that cannot be ununderstood. "My father tried to warn me," she said. "More than once," Marcus said. Something crossed her face at that. Not shame exactly, something harder and more honest than shame. The look of a person holding themselves accountable without flinching away from what that accountability required. "If I agree to cooperate," she said, "what does that mean legally?" "For me," Marcus leaned forward slightly. "In a civil proceeding, marital privilege, the legal protection that generally prevents spouses from being compelled to testify against each other, is significantly limited compared to criminal proceedings. In a civil case, you cannot be forced to testify, but you can choose to." He held her gaze. "If you choose to voluntarily, your testimony is admissible. And given what you know, what you personally witnessed, what you personally signed, your testimony would be significant." Sophia looked at the folder, then back at Marcus. "And Ethan, that is not something I can answer," Marcus said. "That depends on what the evidence shows, what the federal prosecutors decide, and ultimately what a court determines." She nodded slowly. The kind of nod that means a decision has been made somewhere underneath the surface and is only now becoming visible. "I want to speak with Daniel Merritt," she said. "He is expecting your call," Marcus said. Sophia closed the folder. She did not push it back across the table. She kept it in front of her, both hands resting on top of it, as though taking ownership of what was inside. Then she reached into her coat pocket and produced her phone. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Her thumb hovered. Her lower lip pressed briefly against her upper one, and then released. She put the phone back in her pocket. "I need to do one thing first," she said quietly. She stood up, picked up the folder, looked at Marcus one more time. "Thank you," she said. "For not—" She paused, searching for the word. "For not being cruel about it." "It is not my job to be cruel," Marcus said. She nodded once and walked back through the coffee shop and out the door onto Atlantic Avenue. Marcus sat for another 10 minutes after she left, finishing his coffee, watching the street through the window. Then he picked up his phone and sent Richard Hayes a single message. She took the folder with her, That evening, I was standing at the kitchen window of my Upper West Side apartment, watching the light go out of the sky over the Hudson when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Sophia. My heart knocked hard against my ribs twice. I picked up on the second ring. Dad. Her voice was different from every other time she had called me in the past 3 months. The careful steadiness was gone. What was left underneath it was something raw and young and very tired. Can I come over? I looked at the kitchen table, at the 2 chairs, at the window going dark above the river. I'll put the kettle on, I said. Sophia stayed that night until past midnight. We did not talk about the case or about Ethan or about what was coming. We talked about smaller things, a film she had seen years ago, that she wanted me to watch, the coffee maker on the counter that had stopped working properly, whether I had ever replaced the clay pot on the windowsill. It was the first conversation in months that felt like before. When she left, she hugged me at the door quickly, the way people do when they are not quite ready to say what the gesture means. I stood in the hallway after she was gone and held on to that for a while. 3 months is a long time to live inside a legal proceeding. The federal judge at the Southern District of New York granted the temporary restraining order 41 hours after Daniel filed it, freezing all pending share transfers tied to Northbridge Capital's position in Hayes Technologies and prohibiting any special shareholder meeting from being convened until the underlying claims were resolved. Graham Whitfield's attorneys filed an immediate objection. The judge denied it in 4 sentences. After that came discovery, the formal process under the federal rules of civil procedure, by which both sides exchange evidence, take depositions, and build the record that will be presented at hearing. It was slow and expensive and relentless, and it consumed most of August, all of September, and the better part of October. Daniel managed it with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. Marcus continued his investigative work. Helen and Frank spent hours in conference rooms with attorneys going through documents and giving depositions that I was not present for, but heard about afterward in careful detail. Ethan hired Jeffrey Caldwell, one of the better-known commercial litigators in Manhattan, the kind of attorney whose name appeared regularly in the legal press and who charged accordingly. Caldwell was good. He filed motions, challenged evidence, questioned procedures, and did everything a skilled attorney does when the underlying facts are not working in his client's favor. He bought time. He created friction. But he could not make the access logs disappear. He could not unmake the wire transfers. He could not explain away a device registered to his client's name that had been used to copy 6 years of proprietary code in 11 minutes. Sophia gave her deposition in late September. I was not there. She told me about it afterward, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea she let go cold while she talked. She said she answered every question they asked her. She said Caldwell tried 3 times to rattle her, and she did not rattle. She said it was the hardest 3 hours of her life, and she would do it again. I did not tell her how proud I was, because I thought if I said it, she might cry. And I did not want her to cry in my kitchen over something she had done exactly right. By the first week of December, the hearing date was set. The night before, I stayed late at the office. Not because there was work left to do. Daniel had everything prepared, every exhibit numbered, every witness briefed. I stayed because I did not want to go home to a quiet apartment and lie in the dark, thinking about the next morning. The office was better, familiar. The particular hum of a building at night, the cleaning crew moving through the halls, the city outside the windows doing its permanent, restless thing. I sat at the small round table by the window with a cup of coffee that went cold while I looked at the bookshelves. 30 years of company history in this room. The first client contract framed. A photograph from the opening of the original Brooklyn office, two men in their 30s squinting into the sun outside a building that no longer existed, grinning like people who do not yet know how hard the next decade is going to be. Edward on the left, me on the right. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the second ring. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." I leaned back in the chair. Yet here we are. Yet here we are. A pause, the comfortable kind, the kind that two people can only manage after enough years of conversation to know that silence between them does not need to be filled. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question honestly, which was something I had not done much of in the past several months. "Tired," I said. "Ready," both at the same time. "That sounds about right for the night before something important." "Edward." I looked at the photograph on the shelf, those two young men who had no idea what was coming. "Do you remember the morning we signed the partnership agreement on Collins Software's first government contract? You called me at 5 in the morning." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. I was terrified. "You called me because you needed someone to tell you it was going to be fine. And you told me it was going to be fine." "Was it?" "It was better than fine," he said. "Eventually." I smiled at the dark window. Outside, Manhattan glittered in the December cold. All those lit windows, all those lives going on inside them, the city that had been the backdrop to everything I had built and lost and fought for in the past 5 months. "I'm scared about tomorrow," I said. The words came out easier than I expected, maybe because it was late and I was tired, and the pretense of not being scared required more energy than I had left. Not about losing, about Sophia. About watching her sit in that room and do what she is going to do. Edward took a moment before answering. "She is doing it because she knows it is right," he said. "Not because anyone made her. Not because she had no choice." A pause. "That matters, Richard. That is who she is underneath everything that happened." My throat tightened. "I know, and my son." Edward's voice dropped lower, and I heard in it something I recognized, the particular heaviness of a father who loves his child and cannot protect him from the consequences of who that child chose to become. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that I do not hold you responsible for any of it. Not a single piece of it." "Edward, let me finish." His voice was steady, quiet. The voice of a man who had decided what he wanted to say and was going to say it. 40 years. You showed up every time it mattered. You drove to that hospital in July when everyone else found a reason not to. You sat in Daniel's office and listened, and you did not run. A pause. "I have never had a better friend. I needed you to know that before tomorrow." I pressed the phone against my ear and looked at the photograph on the shelf. The two young men squinting into the sun. My chest felt full of something I did not have a name for. Not grief exactly, not gratitude exactly. Something that contained both of those things and several others besides. "Get some sleep," I said finally. "We have work to do in the morning." "We do," he agreed. I sat for a while after he hung up in the quiet office with the cold coffee and the lit city outside the window and 30 years of built things around me on the shelves. Then I turned off the desk lamp, put on my coat, and went home. "Before I take you inside that courtroom, before every secret gets laid out under oath in front of everyone, comment truth below. So I know you made it this far. You have stayed through every betrayal, every quiet moment, every decision that cost Richard more than he showed. What happens next is what all of it was building toward." One more note before we continue portions of this story, include fictional elements added for educational and reflective purposes. If this kind of content is not for you, no judgment at all. You are welcome to step away right here. December in Lower Manhattan has a particular quality to it that other months do not. The light comes in low and gray over the East River, flattening everything it touches, making the stone facades of the federal courthouse on Pearl Street look like they have always been there and always will be indifferent to whoever walks through their doors and whatever those people are carrying with them. I arrived at 8:15. Daniel was already outside on the steps, collar turned up against the cold, a leather briefcase in one hand and a coffee in the other that he offered to me without a word. I took it. We stood for a moment looking at the building, the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. The words were carved into the stone above the entrance in the unhurried way of institutions that have decided they do not need to explain themselves. "Ready?" Daniel asked. "Yes," I said, and meant it. The courtroom filled quickly. I had not expected that, or perhaps I had simply not allowed myself to think about it. But by 9 o'clock, nearly every seat in the gallery was occupied. Hayes Technologies employees I recognized. Partners from Collins Software who had made the trip from Westchester. 2 financial journalists I knew by face, if not by name. And in the third row, sitting with his overcoat folded across his lap and his hands resting on his knees, Edward Collins. He caught my eye as I walked to the plaintiff's table. He gave me a single nod. I returned it. Ethan sat at the defense table across the aisle with Jeffrey Caldwell beside him. Caldwell was everything his reputation suggested, perfectly composed, unhurried, leafing through his notes, with the air of a man who had done this so many times that the choreography was entirely automatic. Ethan sat straight-jacket pressed, expression neutral. Only someone who had spent 30 years learning to read people would have noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. The way his jaw was set a fraction too firmly. He glanced at me once. I held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to Daniel. The judge entered at 9:15. The Honorable Margaret Reeves, 60 years old, 22 years on the federal bench, a reputation for patience with witnesses and impatience with attorneys who wasted her time. She settled her glasses on her nose, looked at both tables and said, "We are on the record. Mr. Merritt, you may call your first witness." Daniel stood. "The plaintiff calls Helen Carter." Helen walked to the witness stand with the careful steadiness of someone who had decided exactly how she was going to do this and was not going to be moved from it. She was wearing a dark blue suit I had not seen before. She sat down. She adjusted the microphone. She looked at Daniel and waited. "Ms. Carter," Daniel began, "can you describe your role at Hayes Technologies?" "Senior Financial Officer," she said. "I served as Chief Financial Officer of this company for 15 years before transitioning into my current oversight role. My responsibility for the company's financial records has never changed." "In the course of your duties, did you become aware of financial irregularities involving a company called Meridian Consulting, LLC?" "Yes." Her voice was clear and even. "Approximately 14 months ago, I began noticing discrepancies in the quarterly reconciliation between Hayes Technologies and its partner companies, specifically wire transfers to Meridian Consulting that did not correspond to any deliverables I could identify in our project management system." "Can you describe what you found?" Helen turned slightly toward Judge Reeves. "Over 14 months, Meridian Consulting received a total of $1.4 million in wire transfers from Hayes Technologies. I reviewed every invoice. Not one of them was supported by a work product, a meeting record, a report, or any other documentation of actual services rendered." She paused. "In accounting, we call that a red flag. In practice, it means the money went somewhere without anything coming back." Caldwell rose for cross-examination with the smooth economy of a man who had done this 10,000 times. Ms. Carter, isn't it possible that the services provided by Meridian were of a confidential nature, strategic consulting, for example, that by its nature would not generate traditional documentation? Helen met his gaze. I have overseen the financial operations of this company for 18 years, Mr. Caldwell. I have overseen every consulting engagement we have ever entered into. Every single one, regardless of the sensitivity of the subject matter, generated some form of deliverable, a memo, a presentation, a recommendation. In 14 months, Meridian generated nothing. She paused for exactly one beat. Nothing at all. Caldwell moved to a second line of questioning, then a third. Helen did not move. Her answers were precise, consistent, documented. By the time Caldwell sat down, I could see from the set of his shoulders that he knew it too. Daniel called Frank Donahue. Frank walked to the stand, carrying a bound copy of the access logs, all 47 pages tabbed and annotated in his small, precise handwriting. He sat down with the logs on his knee and looked at Judge Reeves with the directness of a man who had nothing to hide and knew it. Mr. Donahue, Daniel said, can you explain to the court what Project Keystone is? Frank leaned slightly toward the microphone. Project Keystone is the proprietary software architecture that Hayes Technologies has been developing for 6 years. It represents the core technology behind the company's next-generation product line. The architecture is classified as a trade secret under our internal protocols. Access is restricted to a small number of senior engineers, all of whom have signed non-disclosure agreements. And what did you find when you reviewed the server access logs? Frank opened the bound copy to the tabbed page. On the night of, he read the date carefully. 14 months ago at 11:41 p.m., a user account registered to the Chief Operating Officer accessed the Project Keystone repository. The session lasted 11 minutes and 17 seconds. During that session, the entire code base, every file, every directory, every dependency was exported to an external storage device. He looked up from the logs. The device identifier recorded automatically by our server system was EC Personal Drive 02. That device is registered in our equipment inventory under the name Ethan Collins. The courtroom shifted. Not loudly, a courtroom is not a place where things happen loudly. But I felt it. The almost imperceptible change in the quality of attention in the room, the way 30 people all adjusted their focus at the same moment. Caldwell rose immediately. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is offering a conclusion about the identity of the device user without direct personal knowledge. Judge Reeves looked at him over her glasses. The witness stated what the equipment inventory records show, Mr. Caldwell. That is documentary evidence, not conclusion. Overruled. She made a note on her pad. Continue, Mr. Donahue. Frank turned back to Daniel. 3 days after the export, our cybersecurity monitoring system flagged an outbound encrypted email sent from a personal device connected to the company network. The recipient domain belonged to a software company in Boston that is a direct competitor of Hayes Technologies. He closed the bound copy carefully. That company filed 3 patent applications in the 8 months following the export. The applications describe architectural approaches that are structurally identical to elements of Project Keystone that I personally designed and wrote. The silence that followed was the kind that a courtroom produces when something has just been said that everyone in the room understands cannot be unsaid. Caldwell's cross-examination lasted 22 minutes. He challenged the chain of custody of the logs, questioned the interpretation of the device identifier, and suggested that the patent applications could reflect independent parallel development. Frank answered every question, the same way he had answered Daniel's, with the logs open on his knee with specific page numbers, with the particular patience of someone who had spent 6 years building something line by line and knew every corner of it. When Caldwell finally sat down, Frank looked at Judge Reeves. "Your Honor," he said, "I have one thing I would like to add if the court will permit." Judge Reeves looked at Daniel, who nodded. She turned back to Frank. "Go ahead, Mr. Donahue." Frank looked down at the bound logs in his hands for a moment. When he looked up, his voice was steady, but something underneath it was not something that had been held carefully in check for 14 months, and was now in this room in front of these people finally being allowed to exist. 6 years, he said. I wrote the core architecture of that system over 6 years. Saturday mornings, holiday weekends, nights when the rest of the floor had gone home. He looked at the logs. It was taken in 11 minutes. He looked back up at the judge. I just wanted the court to understand what 11 minutes meant. The courtroom had not fully recovered from Frank Donahue's last sentence when Daniel called the next witness. Marcus Webb walked to the stand the way he did everything, without hurry, without performance, with the economy of motion of a man who had learned a long time ago that deliberateness was more persuasive than urgency. He settled into the witness chair, adjusted his jacket, and looked at Daniel with the patient attention of someone who had given testimony in federal proceedings before and knew exactly what it required. Daniel took him through the share acquisition evidence methodically. 4 nominee accounts, 4 brokerage firms, 14 months of purchases, the cross-referencing of beneficial ownership records that individual brokerages did not routinely share with each other. The total 18.3% accumulated through identities that did not hold up under scrutiny and addresses that led to empty lots and mail forwarding services. Caldwell rose for cross-examination and spent 12 minutes trying to establish that the beneficial ownership conclusions were inferential rather than direct. Marcus answered each challenge with the specific documentation behind it: account opening records, wire transfer receipts, the compliance filings that each brokerage was required by law to maintain. He did not raise his voice. He did not elaborate beyond what was asked. He simply produced the evidence one piece at a time, with the methodical patience of someone who had assembled it carefully and trusted it to speak for itself. When Caldwell sat down, he did not look satisfied. Daniel stood again. Your Honor, the plaintiff would like to submit Exhibit 14. Judge Reeves looked at the exhibit list over her glasses. The audio recording. Yes, Your Honor. A recording obtained by a former analyst of Northbridge Capital made with her own consent, as one party to the conversation, and therefore admissible under New York's one-party consent statute. The recording documents a telephone conversation between Ethan Collins and Graham Whitfield of Northbridge Capital. Caldwell was already on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. The foundation for this recording has not been adequately established. The provenance is unclear, and the circumstances of its creation raise significant questions about Stikutsaktun. The foundation was established through the witness declaration submitted with the exhibit. Daniel said, his voice carrying no edge, just precision. The former analyst signed a sworn statement describing when, where, and why she made the recording. That declaration was provided to opposing counsel 30 days ago as required under the discovery rules. Judge Reeves looked at Caldwell. Was it provided, Mr. Caldwell? A pause, brief but visible. Yes, Your Honor. Then your objection goes to weight, not admissibility. She looked at Daniel. You may proceed. The recording played through the courtroom speakers, a telephone call slightly compressed, the way recorded calls always sound 2 voices in conversation. Graham Whitfield's voice, first measured and transactional, discussing timelines and thresholds and transfer mechanisms. And then Ethan's voice. I had not heard it played out loud in a room before. I had listened to it alone in my apartment once, late at night, after Marcus had delivered the USB. But hearing it here in this room with these people, with Edward sitting 3 rows behind me, and Sophia somewhere in the building waiting for her name to be called, hearing it here was entirely different. Ethan's voice through the speakers, once the old man steps down, Northbridge moves in. We take our cut before the IPO, simple as that. Whitfield's voice. And the daughter, Ethan's voice, without hesitation. She signs what she's told to sign. That's what she does. The recording ended. The room did not erupt. Courtrooms do not erupt, they absorb. But I felt the absorption happen, felt the weight of those words settle into the air, and stay there the way certain things said out loud cannot be recalled once the sound of them has filled a space. I looked at Ethan. His face was composed. His hands were flat on the defense table. But the color had drained from it in a way that no amount of composure could conceal, and the set of his jaw was the set of a man holding himself together through will alone, with nothing underneath the will left to spare. Caldwell began his response before the recording had fully finished. Your Honor, audio recordings taken without the knowledge of all parties. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Reeves said, her voice carrying the particular patience of someone who has heard this argument before. New York is a one-party consent jurisdiction. As I have already ruled, the recording is admissible. Your objection is noted for the record. She looked at Daniel. Call your next witness. Daniel straightened the papers on his podium. He looked at the gallery for a moment, a look that was almost not quite, but almost a pause for breath. The plaintiff calls Sophia Hayes Collins. I heard Caldwell's chair scrape. I heard Ethan draw a sharp breath, a short, involuntary sound, the sound of a man who has just understood that the last wall he was counting on has been removed. I did not turn around to look at him. I kept my eyes on the aisle. Sophia walked in from the side door. She was wearing a dark charcoal suit. I had not seen before her hair pulled back, her face carrying the particular expression of someone who has decided something and is not going to be moved from it. She walked to the witness stand without looking at the defense table. She sat down. She set her hands in her lap and looked at Daniel. Ethan was staring at her. I could feel it without seeing it, the kind of attention that has temperature to it. She did not look at him. Daniel began quietly. Ms. Hayes Collins, can you describe your role at Hayes Technologies? Chief Financial Officer, she said. I held that position for 4 years. During that time, were you asked to sign documents related to a company called Meridian Consulting, LLC? Yes. Her voice was steady. On several occasions. Can you describe the circumstances? Sophia took a breath. Ethan would present documents to me in the context of routine administrative work, restructuring, tax efficiency, vendor management. He would explain what they were, and his explanations were detailed and sounded reasonable. Well, I signed them. A pause. I did not always read them in full before signing. I trusted his explanation. Why? She met Daniel's eyes. Because he was my husband. And because when I asked questions, he always had answers that made me feel as though my concern was the problem, not the document. Caldwell rose. Objection. Speculative. Judge Reeves. The witness is describing her own state of mind. Overruled. Continue. Daniel nodded at Sophia. Were you aware of the true purpose of Meridian Consulting? She held the answer for just a moment. Not out of hesitation, I thought, but out of the particular care of someone who wants to say something precisely. I suspected that something was not right, she said. I chose not to investigate further. That was my failure, and I take responsibility for it. Something moved through the gallery at that, not a sound, just a shift. The collective recognition of someone saying a hard thing honestly. Daniel reached into his folder and produced the final document. He handed it to the court clerk, who marked it and passed it to Sophia. "Can you identify this document?" Sophia looked at it. Her hands tightened slightly on the edges of the paper. "Yes. It is a post-acquisition equity restructuring plan." Her voice remained level, but something underneath it was working very hard. "It reduces my ownership stake in Hayes Technologies to below 5% upon completion of the acquisition by Northbridge Capital." When was this document created? She looked at the date on the document. Her jaw tightened. 14 months before my wedding. The silence that came after that sentence was the deepest silence the courtroom had produced all morning. Caldwell stood. His voice, for the first time since the proceedings began, carried a note of something that was not quite certainty. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess to confer with my client." Judge Reeves looked at him over her glasses for a long moment. Then she looked at Ethan, who was staring at the defense table. His hands pressed flat against its surface, no longer looking at Sophia or at anyone else. "We will take 15 minutes, she said. Her gavel came down once. Clean. Final. I stood up from the plaintiff's table and walked into the hallway. The marble floor, the high ceilings, the particular quality of light in a federal building that makes everything feel both important and impersonal. And then I saw her. Sophia was standing at the far end of the hallway near the window that looked out over Pearl Street. Her back was straight. Her arms were wrapped around herself. Her shoulders were moving just slightly, just enough. I walked toward her. She heard my footsteps and turned. Her eyes were wet, her composure finally, after all of it coming apart at the edges, in the way it will when the thing you have been holding yourself together for is done and your hands do not know what to do with themselves anymore. I did not say anything. I crossed the last few feet between us and put my arms around my daughter, and she pressed her face against my shoulder and shook, not sobbing, just shaking the deep trembling of someone who has been very strong for a very long time and has finally found a place where they do not have to be. I held on. Outside the window, Pearl Street went about its business. A taxi, a food cart, two people walking fast in the December cold collars, up going somewhere that mattered to them. I held on and did not say a word because there was nothing that needed saying. Judge Reeves delivered her ruling 4 days after the hearing concluded. I was in Daniel's office when he called. The judge had found in favor of the plaintiff on all 4 causes of action. The temporary restraining order was converted to a permanent injunction. Northbridge Capital was barred from any further acquisition or transfer of Hayes Technologies shares, and all shares purchased through nominee accounts were subject to constructive trust, meaning the court treated them as never legitimately belonging to Ethan in the first place. The $40 million in escrow was frozen pending the resolution of related fraud claims against Northbridge. The civil ruling was referred to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York for consideration of criminal charges related to wire fraud and trade secret misappropriation. What happened after that was no longer in my hands. Hayes Technologies was mine again. Or rather, it had never stopped being what I had built it to be. The court had simply confirmed what was already true. 2 weeks later, I signed the documents establishing the Hayes Employee Trust, a structure that granted preferred equity stakes to every employee who had been with the company for 10 years or more. Helen Carter, Frank Donahue, 11 others whose names I had known for so long they felt like family. I did not make an announcement. I sent an email, 1 paragraph, no press release. Edward called that evening. "I heard," he said. "Word travels," I said. It does when people are paying attention. A pause. It was the right thing. It was the only thing, I said. Sophia came to my apartment on a Tuesday evening in mid-December. She did not call ahead. She knocked, which she had not done since she was a teenager, always just walked in before the way children do in homes where they feel certain of their welcome. The knock told me something had changed. Not between us. In her. I opened the door. She was holding a small paper bag from the flower shop on 72nd Street. Inside was a single stem, a white freesia, the kind I used to keep in a clay pot on the kitchen windowsill when she was growing up, because her mother had liked them, and then because Sophia had liked them, and eventually just because they were there. She held it out. Her eyes were dry but very bright. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said. 3 words. No preamble, no explanation, no list of qualifications. Just 3 words carrying the full weight of everything they needed to carry. I took the freesia, held the door open wider. "Coffee's ready," I said. She walked in, stopped in the kitchen doorway, looked at the windowsill where the clay pot used to sit. "I'll get another one," I said. "For the pot." She turned and looked at me, and for just a moment her composure slipped. Her chin trembled once quickly before she pulled it back. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the coffee cup I set in front of her. We sat for a long time without needing to fill the space with anything. 3 days before Christmas, I drove up to Westchester. Edward was on the porch when I pulled into his driveway, 2 cups of coffee on the railing, his overcoat on breath visible in the December cold. He raised one hand when he saw me. I raised mine back. I got out of the car and walked up the porch steps and took the cup he offered. The fields beyond his property were bare and brown under a pale winter sky. A crow moved somewhere in the tree line. Everything else was still. "You remember the napkin?" Edward said. I looked at him. "Which napkin?" 1987, that diner in Brooklyn. You drew the entire business plan on a paper napkin." He shook his head slowly. It was completely illegible. "It made sense to me," I said. "It made sense to no one but you." He picked up his coffee. And here we are. I looked out at the fields, at the pale sky, at the crow making its way through the bare trees at the edge of the property. "Here we are," I said. We stood on the porch in the December cold and drank our coffee and did not need to say anything else because some things have been said enough times, over 40 years, that they no longer require words. The crow disappeared into the tree line. The fields stayed still. And that was enough. There is something I have never forgotten since that December morning on Edward's porch. I trusted too completely and stopped paying attention. Do not make my mistake. Trust people, yes, but trust with your eyes open. Those who mean to take what you built will always arrive carrying the language of loyalty. I believe God places certain people in our path for reasons we do not always understand until much later. Edward Collins has been in mine for 40 years. Now I know why. These family stories revenge cannot fully explain because real justice is never about taking back what was stolen. It is about remembering what was always yours. I have learned that family drama revenge is never the point. The point is who you choose to be when everything is on the line. And in every family drama revenge I have ever witnessed, the ones who survive are not the ones who fought the hardest. They are the ones who refused to become what hurt them. If these family stories revenge moved you in any way, leave a comment below and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements, crafted purely for reflection and education. If that is not what you are looking for, step away. Find what serves you best. No judgment, only respect.